say that. Is he going back there? I'm old enough. What? I'm old enough.
All right, we can get started with the next session. So my name is Andrea. I'm also Italian, so it's a pleasure to introduce Andrea Vedaldi, which is, by the way, the first time that I meet in person, despite the fact that I've been reading his paper for many years. Andrea is a full professor at Oxford. He's also a research scientist at Meta in London, and he has won many, many accolades, including, for example, the CVPR 2020 Best Paper Award, the Special Interest Group on Multimedia Test of Time Award, BMBC 2021 Best Student Paper Award, as well as one very prestigious grant, such as the ERC Consolidation Grant, if you're familiar with the European system. And his general area of research these days is 3D generative modeling, and I'm going to leave the stage to him and show you and fall down in the process.
Okay, well, so thank you for the kind introduction. And also, it's an honor to be here to give you this keynote and taking up to an hour of your time. So what I would like to talk to you about today is some of the work that the teams I'm a part of in Meta and in Oxford have been doing on 3D computer vision in the past several years, in fact. So it's going to be a bit of a retrospective as well. But I would like also to contextualize that in the sense of building towards a 3D foundation for computer vision. Not just our work, but the work of our community in general. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean by building a 3D foundation? So if you look back at 40 years ago, when our discipline, computer vision, started, then our pioneers, people like Mar, they had this concept that 3D computer vision would have been central to vision in general. So that means that if you wanted to do, say, object recognition, object detection, image understanding, you would have to have a representation of the data, images and videos, that would have a strong 3D component, either through invariants or through 3D reconstruction. So this thing here in particular is an image that appears in David Marr's book, and I think on page 2 or 3. So you could really see that 3D vision was there playing a central part of solving the computer vision problem. Now, fast forward 40 years later, how did 3D vision actually do? Well, I guess not so well, right? 3D vision has progressed, but we cannot say that for most computer vision tasks that are not about 3D, it's actually playing a central role. In fact, if you have to describe the way images are represented in an image understanding system, you would say that these are just largely two-dimensional patches. Now, this was true in 2004 with Bag of Visual Words. Those were, in fact, just viewpoint, well, kind of like viewpoint invariant points, but at the end of the day, extracted as a soup of these features and fed into a machine learning black box at the time that was a super vector machine. But it's also true today. So 20 years later, with vision transformers, an image is yet again just a collection of 2D patches. Now, what changed, of course, that is not a super vector machine any longer. It's something which is much bigger and much smarter in a certain sense. But the way we represent an image, at least from the perspective of these black boxes, are just 2D patches. Now, this is not to say that machine learning hasn't had an influence on 3D vision. On the contrary. So you could easily argue that machine learning and 3D vision are coming together quite well and quite in a significant manner. So of course, in the past few years, we had new representations that make this transition or this combination of vision and geometry smoother. A very good example are neural radiance fields. We have now a system that can solve tasks which are just inconceivable just a few years ago. So we can, starting from a textual prompt that describes a 3D scene, generate one. And of course, machine learning in general has been very useful in a number of applications that involve 3D vision. For example, learning about three-dimensional deformable objects, doing depth estimation, SLAM, et cetera, et cetera. So certainly there is a lot of machine learning in 3D vision. You've seen that today even during the poster session and the talks. But the question I'm asking here is, will 3D be a core part of the new foundations of vision? So it's not just about machine learning helping 3D, but rather 3D being a core part of the new foundations, something that we would always do when we look at a computer vision problem. Now, to get there, I think it's useful to start from looking for opportunities. So cases which are general, but not too general, where we can really have 3D vision being a big help. And I think one potential opportunity is egocentric data. So why is that? Well, first of all, because egocentric data is becoming more and more important for applications, right? And the reason, of course, is the emergence of technology like augmented reality. So more and more, we're going to see data like this being actually looked at in real applications. But secondly, if you look at the video like this is a video from Epic Kitchen. It's a data set of egocentric videos of people cooking meals, just working in a kitchen. And you can see that there is lots of interesting information about the dynamic, the action that is happening in the scene. But that tends to be quite confusing because overlaid to that, there is a lot of camera motion, which introduces a lot of variation in the data. But really, if you can explain away the camera motion, then interpreting the video becomes a lot easier. And 3D reconstruction in particular, can actually do that. They can remove the effect of camera motion. Because we were interested in looking at this problem, last year we have introduced a data set, which is called Epic Fields. So Epic Fields is an extension of Epic Kitchen, where all we did was to augment the data with 3D cameras. So we did use standard off-the-shelf tools like CallMap, and plus a few tricks to make CallMap more robust and better able to operating at on very long videos. These videos are 40 minutes long sometimes. And we have extracted cameras like those in 3D. Now, this is a small step towards 3D understanding, but it's actually quite useful for the community, I think, because extracting this camera is actually quite annoying, quite difficult. Once you have done it, then doing experiments using 3D vision becomes a lot more easy, more direct. So this is an invitation for our community to actually look at this kind of data by simplifying or reducing the barrier of entry, if you like. And once you have this 3D interpretation of this data in terms of just viewpoint, then you can do interesting things. For example, you can move your information from an egocentric perspective to an exocentric one. So here we have reconstructed the hands using, yet again, an off-the-shelf tool from egocentric perspective, but then we can visualize that in the context of the reconstructed kitchen. So that does two things. One is, of course, it removes the viewpoint dependency, which is nice, but also it avoids to have this sort of tunnel vision. In egocentric data, you only see a little bit of the scene at a time, but by putting this reconstruction in the context of an entire kitchen, which has been built over the course of the entire video, then we can contextualize the information, right? We can see how the hands operate in different parts of the environment to do different things. All right, but the way 3D can help with 2D tasks is much more than that. So one interesting line of work is using 3D to fuse to the information. So if you think about the problem of reconstructing an object in 3D, so what we have are as input a bunch of RGB images, right? Just a collection of pixels with some colors in them. And these images, they tend to be very redundant because at the end of the day, they are images of the same scene. In this case, this sort of cartoon-like axe, all right? But by reconstructing that object in 3D, then we collapse all this information, which is contained in the image, into a single 3D model, which somehow summarizes it and compresses it, okay? And you can do that from the RGB data, of course. That would be NERF, for instance. But if you have any sort of feature extractor that gives you some sort of feature map, then you can apply that to your images. You're going to get an image-like data structure as output. And then you can, using the same exact technology, for example, NERF, you can move that information back onto the 3D model. So here, sorry for the visualization, it's not great, but this is meant to convey the fact that we have replaced our RGB pixels with some sort of different features, and we can move them in 3D, right? So concretely, this is an example from Neural Feature Fusion Fields, or NEF for short. That's the work that we introduced here in 3DV a few years ago. And so what you see here are one of these egocentric videos being processed. In the middle, you see features that have been extracted densely from each frame, in this case using Dino. So Dino is a self-supervised network that extracts features that tend to have high semantic content. And you see here that this is a little bit low resolution. That's a feature of the Dino network we used at the time. But also you see the colorization here is done through PCA of the features that you're actually learning. So these are more high dimensional than just 3 channels. But you can see that they're not exactly the invariant. So the color, they tend to change slightly as viewpoint changes. But if you fuse them in 3D using essentially a NeRF, then they become more stable and high resolution. Now, the key question here is this process of fusing 2D information in 3D actually helping to solve 2D tasks? So it's actually 3D giving back to 2D and making it better. And so the key answer here is that, I guess, is that yes, this is actually the case. So here you see Dino features used to solving a 2D retrieval problem in Epic Kitchen. And we have comparing here 4 different variants of the self-supervised features, Dino, Moco V3, and Date. And in all cases, we compare using the features directly as they're estimated on the images, and then using the features after fusing them in 3D. And in all cases, you can see that in terms of object retrieval performance, measured using average precision here, then there is a big boost in performance. Okay, so that's really what you want to see. You want to see that because you're using 3D, then 2D vision becomes better. It's not just the other way around. But you also get the opposite benefit. So effectively what we are doing here is moving information that has been extracted into 2D semantics, back into the 3D model. And because these features, these Dino features, they capture semantics, what we're doing effectively is moving semantic information, which is unsupervised, from 2D to 3D. Once you have it in your NeRF, say, then you can do things like separating automatically foreground from background, all right? So this is, again, completely unsupervised. And it's nice that you can get these sort of things by the synergy between 2D methods and 3D methods. But you don't need to stop there, so you can fuse many different kinds of information. So here we're fusing 2D segments. So in the middle, what you see here is the output of an instance segmentation system that is supposed to label the object that you see in each frame of the video. And it's doing a decent job, but you can see that the labels, the colors of the object are flashing over time. The reason is that there is no notion of time consistency, if you like, or object persistency, all right? So the objects are re-estimated every time from scratch. And also you see that it's a bit noisy. Sometimes the objects are missed, sometimes they're detected. You can take that, which is pixel level information, fuse it in 3D, and then you get something which is cleaner, more robust. And of course, there's also the benefit of segmenting a 3D scene too, all right? Now, the way you can do this is very, very similar to the way you would just fuse Dino features with a small complication. So this is a schematic representation of how this actually works or looks like. So here we have 2 frames, frame 1 and frame 2 from our video. And we have run our 2D instance segmentation system to get objects in frame 1 and frame 2. So we get here a sphere and an ellipsoid, say. And in this case, the 2D segmentation system was successful, so both of them have been detected. But you see that the colors are different. Here, the color represents labels, so the labels are not consistent. So now if you want to build a 3D model that is a representation of the scene that reflects this sort of partitioning of the scene into objects, then you want to label your 3D objects instead. And yet again, those labels are arbitrary, so they will not be in correspondence with the label you get from the individual frames. So what you can do in order to match your 3D model to the images is you can render it using some form of differentiable rendering. But then the labels don't match. So what you can do is try to solve a data association problem and find a permutation matrix that essentially tries to match the label that you get in your 3D model and the label you see in the images, make them compatible so you can actually learn your 3D reconstruction. And this works, but it's a little bit annoying to do, especially when you have tons and tons of objects you want to match, because then you have a very large permutation matrix that you need to figure out at every iteration of training. So we came up with an alternative, which we called contrastive lift, in which we replace this loss with a contrastive loss. So you see here a schematic representation of how this looks like. So here, instead of regressing the labels directly, what we do is we pick a point that would be the star here, and then we compare that to a number of other points in the image. This one, which is on a different object, and this one, which is on the same object. And what I'm showing there, color-coded, is the distance of the labels. So if the labels are the same, the distance is 0. And if the labels are not the same, then the distance is going to be greater than 0. And if you think about it for a second, then this distance is actually going to be invariant to the permutation of the labels, right? So if you do that for all your frames in the video, and you do that also for your 3D model, then you have something that can match directly, because this relative, this relationship between different points in the images and in the scenes, they're actually viewpoint invariant, and also invariant to relabeling. Okay, so that's the idea of contrastive lift. Does it work? Yes. So this is, again, a slide that shows that if you pick one of these instance segmentation systems, mask former, mask 2 former, or DETIC, and you fuse information in 3D, then on this case, a ScanNet, I believe, all the performance in panoptic segmentation quality goes up by quite a margin all the times. Okay, yet again, a case where 3D helps a method which was originally designed effectively to operate in 2D. Okay? And you can be creative and do even more than that. So here we've seen something that I think is going to appear in archive today. And in this case, what we're doing is we're fusing features that are being extracted from a vision language model. So we use CLIP in particular. And this is not the first time people have looked into this problem. So a good example of prior work that does the same is LERF by Kanazawa's group. But the point is that what we want to do here is to take these CLIP features that are computed at the level of images and fuse them in a 3D model. So when you can say something like green toy chair, then that particular object is lighted up, right? Now the novelty that we have in this way we're doing this fusion now is that the fusion is nested or hierarchical. So we've done it in such a way that you can capture semantic at different levels of granularity. So for example, if you say lid of a cap, it's not going to highlight the lid and the cap, but only what you actually want. So it's responding correctly to compositional queries. So lid of a box is going to light up the box. The donuts, see that all of them light up. But then you can say something like chocolate donuts and only the correct one is picked up. Or you could say something like blueberry donuts and only these ones. I guess they're fake blueberries, but yeah, nevertheless, they've been picked up. And again, this is built on, as everything else I'm presenting today, on a line of work of other groups working on similar problems in our community. The novelty here, again, is a better way of handling this sort of compositional queries by having some sort of hierarchical semantics embedded in 3D. Okay, great. And still 3DV, a few years ago, we introduced a method which was called neural diff. And these results are a little bit old, but I think they're still meaningful because, again, the story here is about 3D vision helping tasks that are very often, like, for example, egocentric video understanding done in 2D instead, okay? And so at the time, what we thought is, all right, so the way 3D vision can help is really by addressing this camera motion. And if you look at an egocentric video, what you're going to see is that besides the camera motion, there is the interesting part of the motion, if you like. The camera motion is almost like a nuisance, although it's good because it gives you some 3D cues. But from the viewpoint of analyzing the semantic, the action that are actually occurring in the video, that's actually a bit like a nuisance because it's just confusing the information. So what you want to do maybe is to separate your information into whatever is static, that doesn't change over the 40 minutes of your video. So that would be the countertop, for example. And then other two layers in this case. So there's the dynamic layer, which is essentially a depiction of the arms. So you don't see them here because that's only a static part. But these are being moved into the dynamic layer that is actually modeling what is moving right now, okay? And then there is another layer here that is essentially in between the static part and the dynamic part, which is lighting up the objects which are semi-static or semi-dynamic. So what do I mean by that? So these are objects which are not being moving. They're not moving right at this very moment, but they have changed over the course of the 40 minutes, all right? So these are objects that were active at some point, used by, in this case, the person cooking a meal, at some point during the 40 minutes, okay? And so you really want to get this kind of information out because then you're using motion to, as a proxy for semantic, because all these objects would be presumably something that is detachable, using old school terminology, so something you can potentially pick up, and so it's interesting to look at them, all right? And this NERF-like reconstruction can help you to tease out these factors. And you'll notice that this is actually a very hard problem for NERF. So NERF is designed to reconstruct static scenes, and here we sort of stretch it to try to model instead the dynamic scenes that are also very, very long in time. So again, these are up to 40 minutes. So is it working? Yes, in the sense that if you use this to, for example, fuse a motion segmentation system, which is only done in 2D, it does perform better. So again, yet again, we see that even in these very hard cases, 3D vision is really helpful in terms of improving what you can get with 2D vision alone. But at the same time, would say no, because, well, this is not a really very good reconstruction, is it? So there's still a gap there. Which brings me to the next topic of this presentation, which is motion, okay? So I think it's fair to say that if we want to make 3D vision really an engine for computer vision in general, we need to make sure that this works for every interesting task in computer vision. And those tasks, many of those, involve understanding motion. For example, if you look at YouTube video, you want 3D vision to be helpful there, well, then you better have a 3D vision system that is able to deal with that kind of data, all right? And that kind of data has the problem that the motion of the camera is either absent or very small, compared perhaps to the motion of the object you see in the video. So here, this is an animation that I got from Andreas Kanazawa's group, which I think makes the point of the state of the art in our community quite well. So what you see here are two versions of data. The one to the left, causal captures. So these are captures that you would expect to find in applications, where again, the camera motion is not all that much, but there is a lot of object motion. And then there are the data that we like to use as a community, And I wouldn't say pretend, but ease our way into modeling dynamic 3D reconstructions. So you can see here that the object is moving, but the camera is moving much more. Okay, that's the trick. So effectively, that's making your reconstruction problem closer to a multi-view setup than it would be in a real-life application. So this is actually easier to, so when you're operating these conditions, you'd actually get an easier life if you want to apply 3D computer vision methods. But really, that's the sort of stuff we want to target in the end, because we want to make 3D vision the new part of the new foundations of computer vision. So what are we going to do about that? Well, I think there's a new family of very good trackers that are being developed. This is an example from CoTracker, which is one of them that we've developed in our team in Meta. But there are several others that are out there, for example, PIPS and Tapir. So these are trackers that are based on very large, well, not very large, but large vision transformers. And right now, they can track a very large number of points over decently long videos and do that quite robustly and effectively. And I do think that this sort of technology will be instrumental into eventually moving 3D vision into understanding these kind of videos more readily than we can possibly do today, okay? Again, this is just a guess, but I think this kind of technology can really open up 3D vision to understanding more general, more complex videos. But when it comes to understanding motion, it's not just about reconstructing, say, a single object, right? So at the end of the day, what we want to achieve is an understanding of motion in general, or if you like, how classes of objects actually move, what are their dynamic properties. And our community has been really good at developing deformable models, so models of objects actually can deform over time. Of course, we can start, this dates back with pictorial structure, which were 2D, but sticking to 3D, probably the most famous and widely used model still today is SMPL. This is specific for humans though, right? So if you want to model a human, which is deformable, usually you would start from this model and build on top of that. But that's just humans. If you look at nature, there's a few more things than just people. For example, there are animals. So you see here an extension of SMPL, which is called small, pretty much from the same group, that extended the concept of SMPL to modeling mammals. And I think they have something around 40 different models there for different type of animals, okay? And this is great because these models become more and more general. But again, we want 3D vision to be completely general, right? We want to model any deformable object that exists in nature. And the issue, if you like, or the limitation on this kind of approach is that every time you want to introduce a new object category, well, sometimes you need to do a bit manual work to define what is the structure of the object. And then usually you need to collect a lot of training data to actually train the model, maybe from laser scanners or something like that. It's fine, you can do it, but it doesn't really quite generalize to the diversity of objects we expect to see in nature. So in the past several years, our team has been, mostly in Oxford really, has been trying to build models that would extend these deformable objects to a much larger set of classes. Now, I cannot claim that we actually achieved full generality yet, so that's still far away, but I still want to talk to you about a little bit of the progress we have done in the past, I guess, 4 years on this topic. So what we want to do really is to try to use as uncreated as possible internet data to try to learn deformable models of objects that can actually articulate or deform over time. One of these works, by the way, is presented here at 3DV. So if you're interested, you can see the poster tomorrow morning. And this line of work is based at a very high level on a simple concept that turned out to be relatively powerful for solving this class of tasks. And so that's what we called at the time photogeometric autoencoding. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, but it's actually capturing a very simple concept. So what we do is we learn a network here, which we call a de-renderer, which is just doing an analysis of the input image you provide. This is a monocular network, so it looks at one image at a time, looks at it, and spits out a number of photogeometric factors, like, for example, the shape, the material, the motion or deformation of the object, the lighting condition, and the camera viewpoint. Now, the point is that when you have these factors, which are interpretable, then you can plug them into a rendering function here, which is actually not learned, that's handcrafted. And the design is design is function gives a meaning to these parameters. So this is shape, that's because the way the renderer actually uses that information. For rendering what? For rendering a reconstruction of the image you put it here as input. Now, once you have that, you can close this into a reconstruction loop, effectively defining an autoencoder, and you can train it. Right? So the high level that this works. It's basically based on the idea of having an autoencoder where the factors here, they are photometric and geometric. Okay, so of course this is not particularly original, But then what we want to do is to make this work for this sort of wide and large set of animal classes. So the first thing you'll notice is that we want to model the shape of an object, but differently, say, from SMPL, we do not want to use laser scanners to define an initial version of the model. We want to learn this from scratch, from data that we download from the internet. So the first thing we need to do is to build a sort of differentiable representation of shape that works conveniently when looped into a training loop that only uses those images, okay? So one way we have done that, which we found works quite well, is to use the representation of the template using a tetrahedral voxel space, which essentially is a way of representing a mesh in a differentiable manner, which can go from this sort of voxel-like representation to a mesh very, very quickly. This is work from NVIDIA a few years ago, if I recall correctly. Now, that's how we actually adjust the parameters of the deformable template. The template itself is initialized like a potato, basically just an ellipsoid. So your animal initially is just a potato. And there is also a skeleton inside, which is handcrafted in the sense of the topology of it, but not really the geometric details of it. And then after training, what we get is a three-dimensional mesh that represents a template, an average shape for the object class. And that is also embedded with the dyno features. So these are the same features I showed you before. With NEF, now we use those to embed them into not a NERF, but into the reconstruction of your template for the object category. So why would you want to do that? Why do you want to do this sort of fusion of dyno features into your model? Well, it turns out these dyno features, and today we could also use features from an image generator like Stable Diffusion, well, they tend to be sensitive to object parts. So here we have a bunch of images of horses. We apply dyno v2, and we visualize the features using PCA. And you see that the head is always purple, the legs are always green, etc. So it's almost like a weak part of a key point detector. So by fusing this information into our 3D model, we make it easier to find an association between the model and the training images, okay? So what we got so far? So far we got an image, then there is a category level model of the average shape of your object, as well as these dyno features. Then there is this de-rendering network that is going to spit out some instance-specific parameters. So there's going to be a texture, which is specific to this horse. There is a deformation. So you can see here that the horse has this little bit of hair that is not in the template, so we pull that out so we can model the horse more accurately. There is an articulation, which is done pretty much in the same way as SMPL, but again, this is trained from scratch. And then there is an estimated light source, so you can get some cues from shape from shading as well. Then you put this information together with your base shape, and you can render your texture, the mask of the object, as well as the dyno features. And you can set this up as a corresponding training losses, where you compare the texture, the mask, and the dyno features with the ones you measured in the image. Okay? So fine. So that's how you can learn, for example, to model a horse. But we don't just want horses. We want to do many more classes. So what we did in CVPR this year, or will be done, I guess, in CVPR this year, is to extend this model further to have not just a single base shape, not just one category, but have many of them. So here you see an image of something which is not a horse, and then this goes into an encoder, and this spits out the same factors as before. So the texture, deformation, articulation, and shading. But on top, what we do is we extract a key or a vector that describes the image as a whole, and uses that as an index using essentially an attention layer into a database of possible base shapes. So here we have the key that comes from the image. You have query. Sorry, we have the query that comes from the image, and then with that you have the keys that are in your database, and you can match the keys to your query using self-attention, cross-attention in this case, I guess, as usual. And with that, you're going to get weighting factors for the different base shapes you have in your bank. You combine them together by just summing the parameters effectively. And off you get a specific template, which is going to be more adapted to what you see here in the image, and the corresponding dyno features as well, all right? So this means that we can change on the fly also the base shape of the object by combining that out of a collection of a relatively small number of them, but still in the dozens. Once you have that, you can render as usual, so you can get the texture, dyno features, and masks, and you can supervise your model. Okay, that was a lot of work. Does it work? Decently well, I would say. So this is a 3D phone on the web, again, CVPR this year. And you can see that we are now able to learn about 200 different animal classes in this way, using only images that we downloaded from the internet without providing additional manual supervision, other than filtering those images to remove the ones that wouldn't be about those animals. Okay? So it looks nice, so you can get this sort of nice sort of collection of animals displayed. But then once you have the model, you can use that for analysis. So you see here the model applied to different images of animals. Again, one image at a time, because the network is monocular. And what you get out is a 3D reconstruction of your object. But it's not just that. It's not just about reconstructing one object instance at a time, right? This is about interpreting the image content as a deformable object category. And because of that, you really do have a skeleton which explains the deformation, which means that then you can play with the deformation, animate your character, if you like, all right? So it's just more than just 3D reconstruction, really mapping that to a common space where all these animations are understood together, if you like. And this works also for things which are not real animals, like this sort of toy cow, some drawing on a zebra. So the model is, because it's trained on a relatively large scale on these very difficult images, is able to generalize quite well. All right, so this sort of stuff we can do with this kind of technology today. And just one more example before moving on. So this is applied now to individual frame in the video. And you can see that it's by far not perfect, but still it's kind of smooth. That really shows that the model is responding robustly to what it sees in these images. Okay? All right. Now, this takes me to the next topic, which is to say, what have we done so far? Well, this is essentially a model that is able to reconstruct these animals because it has learned a 3D prior, right? This is a complex prior, actually, because it's deformable. But generally speaking, when you want to apply 3D vision to data that is not necessarily multiple views, doesn't necessarily have multiple views, well, estimating 3D information is going to be inherently ambiguous, right? If you want to do 3D reconstruction, for instance, from a single image, what are you going to do? You don't really know what the object looks like from the back, for instance. So you could try to set this up as a regression problem, so estimating the model M given the image I naught as input. But that's actually a little bit ill-posed, or to say very ill-posed, in fact. So a better way of thinking about this is a sampling problem in which you condition your image, and then you get a distribution over possible plausible 3D reconstructions, and you want to sample out of that distribution, okay? So we have M's 3D model, I naught is the image, and we define a distribution P of M given I naught, and we want to sample from that. All right, so how are we going to do this? Now, of course, our community has been making amazing progress in modeling distribution over complex distribution over real-life data. Of course, I'm talking about generative AI, and most famously, this is for GPT models for text, but of course, this has translated also to very powerful models for vision, and in particular, image and video generation. Now, I will just very briefly remind you of how these models work, because it's going to be necessary for understanding the rest of the talk. So here we get an image, and you want to learn, in this case, not 3D. It's just an image generator model. What are you going to do? You can apply some noise to that. So what I'm describing are denoise and diffusion models. So now you get a corrupted version of your data. Then you train your network, which is an image network, to remove the noise. Okay? This idea of taking data, corrupting it, and then having a network trained to reconstruct information is actually typical of self-supervised learning. These ideas occurs everywhere. But specifically for the kind of models we are interested in, what you do is you just apply some Gaussian noise, in fact, to the top of your image. Okay? Generally speaking, you also have some additional conditioning information. For example, a cartoon axe, that's a description of what the object is, which is going to restrict the sort of image you want to generate. And then for generation at test time, given your prompt, you start from pure noise, you iteratively denoise the noise you have by applying the network that you have trained several times, and then you get an image. Okay? So that's how diffusion models work. The vast majority of you probably are very familiar with this concept. And why is this good? Well, I think one reason why this is good is because this works very well, obviously. But it works very well in the sense that you can learn very effectively from tons and tons of unstructured data. So you take in the internet, you caption it largely automatically, and that's the data that you use to train this model. And the model, of course, they work very, very well. You're all familiar with DALL-E, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, EMU, et cetera, So all these very, very powerful image generators that can give you very complex images out of complex prompts. And, fine, great, so we have this. So why don't we take this technology and apply that directly to 3D generation? Well, the problem is that actually we do not have large quantities of 3D data to learn this model from. So they could, I guess, but we just lack the 3D data to do so. So what we want to do really is to be able to learn 3D from tons and tons of 2D data, right? And one easy way to do that is to start from a pre-trained model that is able to generate images and see whether there is information in there which could be used to actually solve 3D tasks. So one thing you can do, which is interesting, so you've seen before how I can take the internet images. I can filter them, selecting them by, say, the keyword horse, get images of horses, and then learn a deformable model of that object class. Right? That was the work I just showed you. Okay, fine, that's one way you can do it. But here in 3D, what you're showing is that you can do it in a different way. So you can take the internet images, train first an image generator, say a Stable Diffusion, for example, and then you can prompt that to generate virtual data. So these are not real images of cows. I should really say horses, but that's the image I had on my hard drive. Okay? These are images of cows that have been generated without access to internet images any longer, purely from your Stable Diffusion generator. And then what you can do is you can take those and plug them into the reconstruction loop here, where you can also keep using your image generator to further refine the model. And it turns out that this process actually sometimes returns better results than using real images. So this is actually quite disconcerting in a way, but by generating images for training a 3D model, sometimes we make our life easier, and the reason, our interpretation of that, is the fact that those images, the internet ones, they tend to be quite noisy, but by the time you learn this generator, the generator is tending to finding a sort of canonical or idealized or platonical version of your object. So when you prompt it to give you that back, then it's going to give you somewhat larger, easier images to work with, for example, with less occlusions. Okay, and again, this is going to be presented here tomorrow, so if you're interested, you can have a look there. But moving back, so the point that they want to make now is that we want to take one of these 2D models and use it to then do something interesting in 3D. So one way you can do that is to learn to use, to fine-tune your model to do new view synthesis. So we start from a 2D image generator network, which is prompted by a text there, and we engineer the network in such a way that instead of using together with textual prompt, we prompt it instead on a reference view plus a camera viewpoint change. So now what the model is supposed to do is to sample from a distribution P of I, where I is the image you want to get out, and that I is supposed to be the view C, where C are the camera parameters, of the reference image I naught. All right, so we want to train a network that doesn't necessarily have an explicit 3D model inside, but is nevertheless able, because you have seen tons of images before, through some fine-tuning, able to actually generate different views, new views of your object. Okay? So if you can do that, the nice thing is that you can start from a pre-trained network that was trained on 1 billion images, and then fine-tune it with a little bit of data, maybe from observers, say, which is maybe 1 million objects, say. And then, if that works well enough, if you want to perform 3D reconstruction from a single image, all you do is you generate the missing views, sampling them from this conditional distribution you have learned, and out of that, you're going to get some 3D reconstruction here. Okay? Great. And the community has been going crazy with this idea, and in the past year, I think there are probably more than 100 papers building around this sort of concepts. So here I'm giving some citations, but of course they're not exhaustive, right? I'm doing my best to pick out a few representative works, but you can imagine that this list probably is like 100 papers long, okay? Now, what is important here? Well, one thing is the consistency of these multi-view generators. So what you really would like to sample from are all the new views of your object simultaneously, so I1 to IN, given the reference view I naught you have, all right? And these views, they are not independent, are they? Because they are images from the same object. But really, what we end up sampling from is a distribution which is somewhere in between the true one you want really to sample and a collection of marginals that we multiplied together. So this would be models that, for example, P of I1, P to IN multiplied together. That would be the distribution that you would have from Stable Diffusion without doing any fine-tuning for multi-view generation whatsoever. And now, your actual model is going to live in between somewhere these two extrema, all right? And the point is that the closer you get to the top, the easier it is to do 3D reconstruction. And the closer you get to the bottom here, the harder it becomes. So, for example, there is a method that probably everybody knows by now, which is co-distillation sampling, which in a certain sense is an heroic method because it takes this last case here, where the views are essentially unconditional, and somehow it manages still to find a good 3D reconstruction out of them, right? And it does that iteratively by trying to find some sort of multi-view consistency between these models that are effectively generating each view independently. Or you can train a very robust reconstruction network that tries to bridge the gap, the consistency gap that they are left by the fact that these distributions are not perfect. But it is clear that a lot of these efforts, they can go away if your multi-view generation gets better. So here, for example, we have a slide that is capturing this idea very approximately, very intuitively, but at least it's giving you the sense of what's going on in the community, I guess. So here on one axis we have multi-view consistency, and the other axis we have reconstruction effort, how difficult it is to reconstruct a 3D object from the views you generate. So at the top here we have the infusion, where it's called distillation sampling. We can get a reconstruction even though the views that we get are not consistent almost at all, all right? In real fusion, that's a follow-up paper that we did in Oxford, where we condition on a starting real image here, then you can get a little bit more view consistency, so the task becomes slightly easier. 0, 1, 2, 3, probably also something that everybody knows by now. So this is relearning this conditional model, given an image and a viewpoint change gives you back another image. And then there are models like MVDream that produce several images together, which are jointly consistent, okay? So how one of these multi-view diffusion model looks like. So this is a model that tries to generate more than one view of the object together, right? So it's like a diffusion network, but it's applied to several views jointly. And your network here, they have some sort of connection that make this sampling not independent. And the community has come up with a bunch of best practices on how to do this better and better over time. Where over time here really means a year and a half. So it's a very compressed piece of development. And so these are some ideas that turn out to be useful, at least in our experiments. So first of all, this is a exploded version of the same picture I showed before, where I'm highlighting the fact that this network is effectively a UNet. So each one of these is a block layer in the UNet. And the first thing you want to do is to condition on the viewpoint you have, so a reference image I0 and the camera. And you can pass the image to the input of your network by concatenating that channel-wise. But you can also pass it token-wise, if you like, as if it was a textual prompt. But these are not textual tokens anymore, and feed that into different layers of your network. Okay, so you can condition on the information you want in these two ways, and both of them are useful. Another idea is to share information between the different samples here that you can do very easily because this is all transformer-based. So all you need to do is to tweak your attention to not just attend within one view, but attend across views. And then this is maybe a slightly newer thing. You can change the way the viewpoint conditioning works. So instead of just adding that through tokens, what you can do is you can use Placker-based representation of the viewpoint, and then use that to modulate the activation of your neurons in the UNet in a way which is similar to adaptive instance normalization. And it turns out that these two ideas that we borrowed from prior works, combined together for this problem of multi-view generation, they tend to provide more stable results. Okay, so this is a useful message, I guess. If you want to condition on cameras, this is a really good way of doing it. And not only that, but another thing we notice is that, and this is just a hack, if you share the noise, so if you apply the same noise as an image to all the views you want to generate and diffuse from there, then the results, they also tend to be more consistent. Okay? All right, so we call this variant of this multi-view generator free 3D, just to highlight the fact that it's not for free, but there isn't an explicit 3D model, but you still can get generations which are fairly consistent, okay? So I believe this is an example of an observer, the model trained on observers. And yeah, so again, so you can see that the views is still slightly thicker, so it's not perfect, but it's still nice that you can fine-tune a network to be that consistent without having to have an explicit 3D model inside. Okay, but there is more. So I think if you want to be even more consistent, a better way of doing this is not to start from a image generator, but is to start from a movie generator instead. And so this is IM3D. It was also a paper that we recently submitted to archive. And so the idea there is, this is work we've done in Meta, was to start from a video generator. It's called Emu Video. That was state-of-the-art before Sora. And we fine-tuned that to generate new views of an object. So you see here the input views. Then here you can see the generations that you get by simulating this camera that goes around. And it's kind of obvious that we get higher resolution, higher fidelity results because the base model is better, but also because the base model is trained from the outset to learn about dynamics. And in a certain sense, camera motion is part of the dynamic you observe in many scenes. So the model knows about that. It knows it better if it is a video model, okay? So here we only need to generate 16 views, but in practice, you would be able to generate a video at full frame if you wanted to. But you don't need that for the purpose of 3D reconstruction. And then once you have these images, are they really consistent? Well, the proof of the pudding is, can you nerf it? Or in this case, can you Gaussian splat it? And the answer is yes, to a large extent. So it probably is difficult to see from the slides. But so what you see there to the right are reconstruction done using Gaussian splatting. So those would be 3D consistent by construction, because there's now an actual 3D model underneath. But they're slightly blurrier, because these 2D generations are not completely perfect just yet. Nevertheless, the point is that you don't need to do any distillation, any score distillation sampling. So this whole thing is minutes, it's not hours. It's not, so 60 minutes, 2 hours. It's just like 2 or 3 minutes to get an object out now, okay? Because we have put our effort in improving the way the multiple views are generated. And if you really want to push this, and you really want to have something which is 3D consistent, then you can use this idea which is called V-set diffusion. This is a paper from last year now, where we were wondering how we could actually do diffusion 3D properly. And the tricky bit there is that you cannot really have 3D ground truth for your objects, as I said a few times, not at a sufficiently large scale. So you want to treat 3D as a latent variable. And a neat way of doing that is to say, okay, let's still do 2D diffusion, but let's plug the 3D model, 3D reconstruction step, inside the denoising network. So the denoising network here is operating in such a way that it's not generating the images directly, but it's generating those images by reconstructing the object in 3D, obtaining something like a nerf on the fly, and then rendering the cleaned up views by rendering that object, okay? So this means that you don't really need to denoise here, but you're still gonna get, as latent variable, something which is a structure which is meaningful, and the structure comes from the fact that the rendering function here is handcrafted. It's just emission absorption, okay? Does this work? Yes. So here you see example from V-set diffusion last year. So couldn't at the time really run very large scale experiments. So you can see that in ShipNet cards and this data set of small characters from Minecraft. But this idea has been picked up by further work down the line. So DMV3D and large Gaussian models are two examples that use the idea of V-set diffusion plus other innovation. For example, a large reconstruction model here, and something which is similar to the splatter image there as well, that I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. Which brings me to the last part of the talk, and that's the cost of doing 3D, all right? So this is a mock version of this model that probably a lot of you are familiar with by now, which is the large reconstruction model. This appeared late last year, but has been an exploding success, I would say. So many people that want to do 3D object generation are using that or a variant of that now. And what is this model? Well, essentially, in a nutshell, it's a big transformer that takes as input an image and spits out a 3D reconstruction, okay? And stands in the name, this is a large model, large reconstruction model. So it works great. The downside, at least if you're not in a company, is that it takes 385 GPU days to train it, okay? So if you're in an academic lab, that's difficult. So because I'm both in Meta, where we do have GPUs to do this, but I'm also in Oxford, where we don't, okay, then we have been asking ourselves, what can we do in terms of improving efficiency? And so that's what one of our students was able to come up with. So that's called the splatter image. So what is it? It's a super simple idea that works better than I thought when the student told me first about this in the first place. To me, it seemed like a bad idea, but actually turned out to be a very good idea, all right? So that's one case where the advisor was wrong and the student was right. So how does it work? So you take an input image, and then you have a network here, which is an image-to-image network, for example, a ConvNet. And what this does is associate to each pixel into your image the parameter of a 3D Gaussian. So this is based on Gaussian splatting. Everybody's familiar with that as well. But what we're doing here is we are estimating, just using this CNN, or image-to-image network, 1 Gaussian per pixel, all right? So what you see here is that we're estimating the opacity, the color, the shape, so the covariance matrix of the Gaussian, and the mean, so the location of the Gaussian in 3D, okay? Now, crucially, we allow this, the model to shift Gaussians off the ray that corresponds to a given pixel. So it would be kind of natural, right, to do something like depth estimation. So you get your input image here, which in this case is a 4x4 image. And then for each pixel, you look along the ray, and you try to estimate the distance of the object, or the depth of the object, more accurately, from the camera center. And that's just molecular depth estimation, right? Everybody knows about that. But the problem with that is that you can only reconstruct the frontal side of the object, the part that you actually do see, right? But here, with the splatter image, we want to reconstruct the object 360 degrees. So we want to get a full 360-degree reconstruction of what we see in the image. So that's not enough. So what we do is we get a network to predict still depth, but then to offset it by an arbitrary dx, dy, and dz, so that we can place the Gaussian somewhere else in 3D space, for example, to cover for what would otherwise be holes in the back. So does this work? It's a bit of a crazy idea because it's heavily biased to modeling the front, right? Well, these are the kind of results you can get. So this is a train on a single category. This is a Co3D Bayes. So Co3D is a data set of multi-view objects that we introduced in Meta a few years ago. And you can see that the constructions are pretty decent, especially for the time it takes to get them. The back is still a bit blurry, but that's expected because this is a regression network. It's not doing sampling. You can combine this with a sampler to actually get sharp reconstruction, and DMV3D would be an example of that. And I briefly mentioned that before. Okay? Or use Bisset diffusion, if you like, to turn this into a sampling method. And this here you can see the same idea of a splatter image, but in this case applied to fire hydrants, also from Code3D. Okay? All right, is this limited to a single category? No, actually. So we've been lately trying to train this on observers, so much larger scale data set, and then in this case testing it on Google scanned objects, and you can see that we're getting some decent results there as well. Okay? So this seems to be a promising idea that would generalize better and better in the future. And so why do I think these kind of ideas are important? Well, again, really the big game change here is not really the quality, but rather is the efficiency. Right? So you see here new view synthesis using Google scanned objects and ShapeNet cars. We're comparing a bunch of alternative methods, and you see the splattered image in terms of LPIPS metric is about the same, sometimes a little better, sometimes a little worse. Here, for example, I'm comparing to LRM, although that's a tricky comparison because we do not have the implementation from the original authors. We have an open source version of the same, which we don't know whether it performs quite as well. But the main point here is that you can think that the splattered image works at a comparable level of UV synthesis quality. The difference is that it doesn't take 300 GPU days to train the model, it takes 7. Okay? So it's 2 orders of magnitude just about faster. And that makes a huge difference once it comes to learning 3D models with, say, universities kind of resources. So it's much faster training, but also you get the benefit of faster reconstruction. So this is real-time reconstruction easily because it's just an image-to-image network. And you also get, and that's just because we're using Gaussian splatting, very, very, very fast rendering, which is part of the reason why training is so fast. So this can render at 600 FPS in case you need to. Okay. Right, so this is more or less what I wanted to say about the progress we have made in 3D vision. So there's much more from our labs, but I only could cover a bit today. But I would like, again, to make a point of why I think this connects to this bigger problem of building towards 3D foundation and how our community, what are some of the problems that our community will have to look into more detail in order to get there. So first thing I said is that there's an opportunity. So, of course, eventually we want 3D vision to be good for everything or almost everything. But for now, there are some data sets that, or some types of data where we're more likely to make a difference with 3D, and I think that's egocentric data. The reason is that it's becoming more and more important, more and more people are working on it because of AR, and also because you have a lot of camera motion that you can, on the one side, remove, and the other side can help you to actually do 3D reconstruction. The other issue is motion. So we want to have networks that interpret data in 3D, but they do that on any sort of video or images. So for example, any YouTube video. And our models are not quite there yet. So we need to work on methods that can do 3D vision, yes, but a level of generality and robustness that if you take a YouTube video, they would actually work there too. And so I think this new generation of trackers may be a concrete way of designing architecture that can eventually go there. Generative AI is also likely to play a very important role. So when we do 3D vision, again, often we do not have the luxury of having multiple views. We have a single view, maybe a video is from a monocular camera. And if you want to infer 3D properties of the world, then we need to learn priors. These priors could be learned from 3D data, but we have a lack of that. So we need to learn it from gigantic quantities of images and videos in the order of billions, or hundreds of millions at least of data samples. And for that, we can use generative AI models that are designed for images and videos and evolving them to have 3D properties or to turn into 3D models as well. And finally, this, if you like, problem with efficiency. So especially when it comes to generative AI, resources are astronomical sometimes, so it might be daunting for an academic lab to get into this action. But there are new classes of methods like Gaussian splatting and things you can do on top of that, like splattered image, that can really solve some of these tasks much, much easier without having to lose almost anything in terms of quality performance sometimes. And I will just conclude by flashing the people who actually did all the work you've seen today. So that's the Oxford team, as well as the sponsors that are sponsoring this research, and then the team at Meta as well. Okay, that's everything, and I think I have some time for questions. Okay, so is there any question? Okay, great. Hello.
I only need one. Fantastic talk, Andrea. Thank you so much. Over here. Maybe a bit of a technical question. I think somewhere in between slide 40 and 50, there was an idea that the denoising process would first generate some neural field. Yeah, I think you skimmed over it. Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
And then from that neural field, you would render the output for supervision. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit, because, I mean, generating a neural field from slightly denoised or mostly noisy images sounds like a challenging task.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah, this one. Yeah, thank you.
It is, but you can see that we have now this powerful reconstruction network, like larger reconstruction models and splatter images that can actually do that quite efficiently. So that's the trick. So you have this new network that can, they're very powerful reconstruction system, and you can embed them into your denoising process. And then this actually can get you a 3D object essentially on the fly every time. I know this sounds expensive, and it was not feasible just a while back. But now by taking those networks that do reconstruction in a fit-for manner very effectively, it's now becoming possible to do even this. In fact, this is a great way. If you have a good reconstruction network, like say splatter image, you can take it, plug it here, and turn it into a good generator instead. So this is based on the fact that you have good image-based reconstructor, and you can then use them to design this architecture and fine-tune them to do this instead.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, thank you so much for the great talk. So I have a question regarding the 3D model generation. So basically, you showed some amazing animals there.
Yes.
But we can eventually rig them and make them move, but this is actually not how animals move, right? So they have fur, and they have some pose-dependent deformations. And in the end, basically, there are multiple challenges. For example, the meshes, by default, are not a good representation to model hairs. We generally model them using curves.
Absolutely.
And then making them move. So what is your opinion about the future direction toward this, that how we can handle all these challenging cases as well?
It is a very interesting question. So I can give you an answer which is based on what we're trying to do now a little bit in our lab. So I do agree that meshes are nice. Also very important for applications, by the way. We should not forget about that. But they're a bit limiting as well in terms of fidelity. First of all, this is not as well as good as, so meshes could be much better than this, by the way. Okay, so there's still a gap that we can fill without having to move to different representations. But one thing we intend to do is to see whether we can use the splatter image, the Gaussian splatting, to do deformable animals as well, in which case you have this sort of less structured representation, which is based on 3D points, to actually model these details. And there is some evidence that Gaussian splats are actually good at hairs sometimes.
Thank you.
We still have time for a few more questions. Anybody else? No? I will ask you a question.
Yes.
So you've been following everything that's been happening across the various areas in 3D vision, right? So you have, LoRa on one side, you have like Duster on the other, and then everything that has been going on at a crazy pace on the Gaussian splatting side is like, do you have a forecast for what the convergence of these will be? Like,
except video models.
Right. So other than video models will just solve it completely and then we're out of a job.
Exactly. It's difficult, but I think it's a very good way of thinking about it. So there is a convergence in machine learning, obviously. So we have this bigger and bigger GPTs that can do a bit of everything. And we have video models which are great, and they have emergent 3D properties. So those will also play a big role. And I think probably these other tasks will also converge into these big model classes eventually. So my 5 to 10 years prediction is that probably everything will converge in a gigantic GPT, potentially. What's going to be the role of 3D vision at that point is harder to predict exactly. But I think you're still going to need to do some specialized work to be able to pull accurate 3D information out of these genetic models. Maybe that's going to be the role of this community in the future. That sounds a bit dispiriting, but I think there's still tons of work to do before actually we get there. But yeah, so I briefly mentioned trackers. I do think that that's another good platform to start to do video understanding that also has 3D inside. So again, more convergence, more based on very large visual transformers, and more combination of different kind of a 3D analysis into a single model.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, let's do another round of applause for Andrea for the great talk. This concludes the morning session. We're back at 2:30. Please correct me if I'm wrong. For another fantastic talk from Professor Scaramuzza from Zurich. And please, if you have an oral session following the keynote, come 10 minutes ahead of time right here to make sure your material is all good before the session starts. Thank you.